I've been reflecting on beliefs a lot lately as to why we have them, why we need them, and how many layers of belief function at the root of every human life. Often within spiritual culture, when we talk about beliefs and letting go of beliefs, we're typically talking about one specific layer of belief, and that tends to be around metaphysical beliefs, religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs. But belief runs so much deeper than that. When you look at the ordinary person, the average person, they may hold some metaphysical beliefs, but there are other beliefs driving who they are as a person, their sense of identity, their sense of self. There are political beliefs. There are social beliefs, communal beliefs. And then there are beliefs that are related to who they are as a person. I am a father, I am a husband, I am an employee, I am a citizen of so-and-so country. I am a man, I am heterosexual or homosexual. These are all fundamentally, at the end of the day, beliefs. In fact, every belief that we have is related to some kind of social or societal construct. Even your name, even my name, is a belief. It's a sound that was uttered out of my parents' mouth that then became my name. If you were to ask me, who I am, and I made a grunting sound, that would be absurd to you. And yet if I say my name is Shiv, that seems acceptable, because we've kind of become conditioned to symbolize ourselves according to words and sounds and images. But fundamentally, those are simply beliefs. There's no such thing called a Shiv. Shiv is simply a sound. Similarly, there's no such thing called a man or a woman or a child or an adult. These are various categories we've divided people into based on certain biological characteristics or developmental phases, but outside of that, they truly don't have a reality other than the social reality we ascribe to them. For example, the definition of man beyond the biological biological construct, as in having certain kinds of genitals. There's a social angle to what it means to be a man, which is a stereotype. Similarly, there's a social angle to what it means to be a woman, which is a stereotype. And this is a social construct. This is how we have evolved to construct our expectations of what men and women are and how they should behave. But there is no true reality to any of that outside of the biological reality. The same can be said of race, the same can be said of nationality. All of these are social constructs. So there's a social reality, and that is for sure. But that social reality is a kind of narrative. It's a narrative that has evolved over centuries. And that narrative is based on a lot of story making, is based on a lot of beliefs. And so when we construct our own sense of identity in relation to that narrative, and every human being has a sense of identity that is related to the social narrative. No matter how loosely, everybody has one. that is the sense of self we call an ego, then that ego itself is based upon that very belief construct. Without that construct, without those bearings, without those coordinates that society provides us, that ego has no reference point. That identity has no reference point. If I go into the woods, it is meaningless that my name is Shiv, because nothing in nature will recognize the sound that is Shiv. It's only human beings and society that does. It's on my birth certificate. It is on my passport. Every time I pay my taxes, I have to identify myself as Shiv. So human society understands that it needs me to be Shiv. But when I go out into nature, Shiv is meaningless. Similarly, the fact that I'm a male, other than my genitalia, is meaningless in nature. The fact that I am of a certain ethnicity and of a certain race is meaningless in nature. The lion will eat me whether I'm white or black or brown. It doesn't care. My meat tastes just as good to it. And so all of these constructs, all my identity falls apart the moment I'm extracted from society and I have no reference point. So what is the value of belief? And where does it hamper us? Well, these are two very important points we need to consider, because belief does have a value. Because if we truly do not subscribe to any form of belief, or at least pretend to, in a sense, to sort of play that game, if we do not have any reference point to be able to, then we have no way of relating to society. Society will require that you have a social insurance number and a name, no matter what. Even if you don't identify with that name, you have to have one. Or you are a persona non grata. To be a citizen, you need a bank account. You need a number of things. So, at a certain level, some form of belief is an absolute necessity in order to be able to function in society, to play along with that game. And the more we are able to relate on that level to the stories other people are subscribing to, that becomes the basis of our relationship with other people. If I need to be able to play the role of a friend, the role of an employee, the role of a father, the role of a son, the role of a husband, in order for other people to relate to me. If I cannot be any of these things, then society can't accept me. However, what also ends up happening is that belief becomes its own poison at a certain point, because over time, that sense of identity becomes the only sense of self we have. We lose any connection, any reference point to that sense of being that exists prior to all of this beginning, right? It's like asking the question, who were you before you had a name? Well, there was a someone, there was an existence before a name was given to it, before an identity was given to it. There is something prior to all of that, and that is always existing. But what ends up happening is we lose our reference point to all of that because we get caught up in the construct. And so over time, the attachment and the identification with that social identity becomes a suffering of sorts, because there's no substance to any of it. That identity is always changing, it's always evolving with relation to social circumstances, the circumstance of one's environment, the people one is relating to, the events in one's life. That identity is constantly in flux. One day you might be a powerful CEO of a company, the next day you've retired and you suddenly find you lack purpose and your life falls into crisis. So many people go through crises in their lives: midlife crisis, retirement crisis, crisis after divorce, crisis after death. And while the event itself causes a certain amount of grief, the real crisis is not around the grief. The real crisis is due to the loss of identity, the loss of social identity as a result of that event. It is the grief of now being a divorced man or divorced woman, quote unquote, or the grief of now being retired and not employed, quote unquote, or the grief of being widowed, quote unquote. These are identity markers, and often we feel empty when our identity is stripped away because we have no reference point to anything below that, beneath that. It's like being stripped of your clothes. Yes, there's a moment of potential embarrassment or nakedness as you're exposed to the world. There's the shock of that sudden stripping. But imagine if you weren't aware of your own body beneath your clothes. That would be a truly traumatic event. If you felt that your clothes and what you were wearing on the outside was all that you were, was your body, then that kind of event would be so traumatic, it would take a very long time to recover from. That would cause true and deep suffering. As opposed to being stripped off your clothes, being naked and saying, oh, well, this is what it is, and I'm still here, I'm still fine, I still have my body, I'm still healthy, and eventually I'll put on another set of clothes when I find them. There's a big difference in how that impacts a human being when they have a point of reference to who they are beyond their identity, and when they're convinced that identity is the entirety of who they are. And so I'm not the kind of person who says one should do away with beliefs altogether, because beliefs are functional, just like clothes are functional. They provide some degree of protection against the elements. They provide some degree of they provide some degree of being able to relate to other people in society, because we live in a society where people are clothed and there's an expectation that we will be wearing our costumes and our clothes at all times in some way, shape or form, depending upon the social scenario. And so it gives all of that. It gives the protection of the pack. It gives us a way to relate to other human beings and all of that. So there is a functional utility to having beliefs. But the beliefs in themselves, if they go all the way to the root of convincing you of that is your whole reality, that if you believe you're a Christian, or if you believe you are identified with a certain race or a certain nationality, and that national identity, that racial identity, that religious identity is stripped of you, and it leaves you completely void and hollow, to the point where you no longer have any sense of yourself, then that is what causes people true suffering. That is the root of true suffering. The human spirit is designed to endure immense amounts of pain, physical pain, even psychological pain can be withstood. But what the human spirit cannot endure is its own negation. when there's no acknowledgement of its own existence. That is when a human being truly succumbs, because they are a true victim of their circumstances then. They truly believe that they only exist because circumstances have been conducive to prop them up, and when circumstances collapse, they too will collapse. And there's no endurance there. There's no ability to be resilient, because there's nothing that we find of ourselves that transcends the circumstances. And that is a true tragedy, because every human soul, every human being, at the fundamental core, exists regardless of the permutations and combinations of their circumstances. You do not exist because your country decided you should exist. You do not exist because your religion decided you should exist. You do not exist because of any kind of social construct. Society cannot create you. It is only life that causes you to exist, and it is only life that can cause your existence to end in this human form. I came into this world absolutely naked, with not even a name. And I will leave this world absolutely naked, with not even a name. And everything that is provided to me, or that I clothe myself in through the process of a lifetime, is not truly who I am. It is simply who I show up as in any given moment. And because life is impermanent, my identity is impermanent. And because circumstances change, my identity will change. And if I make peace with that, if I make peace with the fact that everything that I am to others from a social standpoint can be taken away, can be reduced to dust, including my name. Even my name can be taken away from me. If you ever watch the movie The Crucible, Daniel Day-Lewis, that is his greatest suffering. Because he says, you can take my life, but leave me my name. Even your name can be taken away from you in the right circumstance. But what no one can take away is being. Because I simply am. And if I'm rooted in that, if I'm rooted in that deep sense of my own being, of being itself, not even my own being, but that becomes its own kind of separation, but just in this basic, simple sense of existing, as everything else does, then no matter what is taken away from me or what is added, that baseline never changes. And that baseline itself is the source of my happiness.